The floor is all yours, but first tell us what you really do for a living.
Okay, well, I like what I really do for a living. I think the simplest way I can describe what I do is I help new companies start and old ones stay alive. So that kind of implies that I'm working both with startups and corporates. I work with startups exclusively in clean tech, and I've been involved in ClimateLaunchpad from its inception. I'm the national lead here in Cyprus for ClimateLaunchpad and a regional partner of Climate-KIC. So lots of stuff, not only at stage one, which is what we consider ClimateLaunchpad, but also stage two, which is the business modeling. And one of the key things, actually cool things about what's been happening in the last probably 7-8 years now, is that corporates are looking to startups to learn how to start new products and services, which is not how it used to be. It used to be the exact opposite thing. Startups are looking at corporates and envying them and trying to be them. And now we have this coin that's been flipped in favor of startups, actually, where corporates are looking at them. So what I do is I help corporates think like startups. And that's sort of the premise of what I've been involved in. I'm heavily focused in innovation and business modeling that leads companies to de-risk new products and services and launch them in the market with minimizing the risk for failure.
And apparently you have a few cool tricks to show us, Paris. You want to show us some of it?
Yeah, so basically what I think is interesting in following up on what your conversation with France about, the whole COVID situation, it's affected everybody and everybody's business. And my motto is that you need to stay relevant. It's not an option, it's a survival tactic. And so amidst this whole sort of change in the world, I've been affected tremendously. In fact, when the lockdown started happening, I canceled 22 flights. And that's been my reality for years now, traveling to my clients' locations and traveling quite heavily. And so that just came to a halt when the lockdowns happened. And so I started wondering, what do we do now to stay relevant? How can we convert into something that was a very interactive workshop, very engaging? I mean, come on, we're talking innovation here, right? It has to be something that is sort of at the top of the scale when it comes to cool interactive workshops. How do you make that possible using these tools and Zoom and all sorts of other streaming tools? And it was a bit of a 2-3 month process of thinking of how to pivot my business in order to be able to offer that value through the net. And so I think it's possible, and maybe some people can be inspired by this. I know it's quite possible if you kind of put your mind to it and watch a bunch of YouTube videos. I think I must have watched maybe 80 hours of YouTube videos on how to create a setup and what you need to do. And so here's a quick little demo of the kind of stuff that you can do when you have the ability to sort of learn, because that's all it takes. Here's a moment. So let's start with the fact that I'm back in a plane now, right? I'm just walking around, hey, I miss you, that kind of thing. And everybody, I'm sure, is wanting to have this moment again. And that moment where you're just sitting on the plane and waiting for, sorry, that's mine, waiting for everybody to just, relax and enjoy the flight. And it goes on, because what you do is you use a green screen or a blue screen, video connections, and your imagination, and anything is possible. And so for me, what was a key learning was which industries were to the ones that were leading this game, from which you could learn from. So I started asking myself that question: which are the industries in the world that are leading the live streaming space? And as I got to sort of research, I realized that there was, gamers. Gamers are actively using this technology to, up their game online so you can actually monetize that experience. Then you have a completely different industry. I did not expect this. Houses of worship, which was basically mostly North America, churches that were experts at streaming the service online. And like everything, innovation starts from two other industries, which is usually war and adult films. So these are the three industries that were kind of leading the game. But the focus that I had was on gamers. And here's an example of a gamer. This guy's called Ninja. And he is 20-something and a multi-millionaire. This is his setup. And mine is exactly the same, minus the samurai swords, the LED lights, the cool gaming chair. But yeah, it's not exactly the same. Mine is probably more like this. So this is from churches. And so what you have is this amazing kind of DIY hacking new market out there that I call the prosumer, where the pro would be the TV studio, the amateur would be your average YouTuber with a webcam, and you have this sort of midpoint of the prosumer who wants to get access to the features that TV studios have, but it's been difficult so far. So some companies started offering these products, and here's a little joke. The one company that's kind of leading this path and is really offering all their services to churches is called Black Magic. And I think there's an irony in that. And so these Black Magic boxes find their way in churches and they're able to stream their service. And what the main difference, as I wrap up, what I think is an interesting topic for how people can think of how they do something more interesting that keeps people engaged online, is to understand the difference between live and real time. And what you're watching now is live. So the audience, what you're watching is live. It means it's live, but it's not really. What I mean by that is there's that buffer time of 20 seconds to 2 minutes or 3 minutes. But what I'm watching here with Suresh is real time, because he's asking me a question, I'm getting it instantly. When you crack the nut of how to do something real time and be able to interact with the audience, I think that's when things come together. So that's where we've pivoted as a business. I don't think that there's an excuse for somebody not to pivot. Many businesses, by nature of their business model, will not be able to figure it out right away. But if, for example, you're a restaurant and you haven't started delivering yet, that's a problem, right? So everybody needs to go back to step one and say, how do we pivot our business model to survive the pandemic and use that later as an opportunity to even be more competitive? And that's what's happening around the globe right now. And I think that entrepreneurial spirit is just absolutely amazing.
Paris, it might be relatively easy for a small company to pivot. What happens when a large company suffers? A large airline, for instance, how do they pivot?
Right. So then that's the biggest things, that one of the sort of the main challenges that I'm dealing with is talking to those large enterprises. And you're looking at pharmaceuticals who are trying to go digital, right? For example, their business model is always predicated on research and development, blockbuster drugs. Now they're dealing with razor thin margins. But for years now, they've been trying to kind of break into digital. Same thing with airlines. If you start to look at and unpack their business model, which has been predominantly very sort of one-track minded, and this was the exception, the question now is not necessarily pivoting, it's more survival so that they can have the resources to think, once they're back on their feet, how do we diversify our revenue? How do we pivot into services that allow us to stay afloat? But it's difficult with airlines because it's the one thing that's affected the most. So I have no idea what they can do, but I'm sure that there's many people in rooms constantly talking about what do we do to bring in some revenue streams to diversify us and make us stay alive. So that, I think it's a question of time, and it's not a question if it's possible or not. We'll figure it out. We always do.
Paris, tell us a little bit more about what kind of startups are top of mind when it comes to Cyprus and clean tech. What are some of the top areas that companies are working on?
Definitely. And we've had a really nice selection of startups this year and many other years that we've participated in ClimateLaunchpad. Cyprus is, I would say, if you were to kind of pinpoint one industry that it's big in and one industry that we have a lot of startups that are always looking to create value in, that would be shipping. Obviously, because of our location, it's a big shipping hub, and there's a lot of shipping headquarters here. We have favorable tax regimes that also is attractive to them, which means there's clients here, there's head offices, and there's people to talk to. And we've had a lot of startups over the years, and we have some this year as well, who have value propositions related to shipping. What is also interesting to note is that many startups who may have a value proposition that is not directed to the shipping as a customer can easily be adapted to shipping. A ship is a microcosm of everything, right? You need every solution on there. And maybe a startup is not thinking of shipping, they might be thinking of hospitals for something. But with a little twist, a shipping company can also become a client. So we find it our job to make sure we actually use those startups, not just from Cyprus, but from the entire network of Climate-KIC, to say, hey, what if you sold through shipping? What would change? What would be the value? And so that we find that to be a role that we're involved in very actively.
What's the biggest challenge you face when you advise a company? Is it the founder's ego? Is it the structure of the company? Is it the nature of the industry?
The biggest challenge always is people. And what that relates to in corporate, it's culture. What I do is go into companies and tell them we need to fail as quickly as possible, and that is not always met with open arms, right? They have to have the culture already that accepts failure. So dealing with that, creating an ecosystem for innovation within large enterprises that are to the level of Fortune 500s, having the conversations with leadership to be able to enable that kind of type of mentality. Jeff Bezos said we weren't failing fast enough, right? How many Jeff Bezos do you know? So it's being able to inspire people, to show them how the best way we learn is through our mistakes, which is exactly what's happening with this global pandemic. We're going to fix a lot of things that led us to this disaster, and that's the best learning. And so it's accelerating everything. Failure is the biggest catalyst, the biggest accelerator for learning. And so that biggest challenge for me is to get people to buy into that, understand that, and even bigger challenge, to pay for that, to pay to fail.
That is final question for you. The companies that are participating in the Climate Launchpad, their stated goal is to make the world a better place through climate action, through entrepreneurship, and through products and services. But there are many companies whose stated goal is profit, for instance, a big shipping company. What can they do to make the world a better place by pursuing profit, I guess?
If we take the example of shipping, one of the things that they are already doing is they're paying attention. One of the biggest sponsors and major partner for years now in everything we've done for clean tech here in Cyprus is a shipping company. Bernard Schulte Ship Management is one of our biggest supporters. They're actively, I'm sure a lot of people from the company are watching right now, because for them, it's about being able to figure out what solutions help us mitigate climate change, but at the same time, don't shut down the company. And that's what you have, the two extremes, right? You have the people who say, you know, shipping is really harmful, they should stop. That's not reasonable. You can't just stop shipping. There's a ripple effect that happens with that. And then you have sort of the other side, which is it's all about profit. And I think from what I've seen, at least with my interactions, is we're no longer at any of the extremes. We're somewhere in the middle where we're trying to find that sweet spot to say, what can we do that gives us early wins, direct impact, so we can all believe in it and we can all rally others to believe in it, so we can go for the even more audacious goals. What are some of the things? And we already see a lot of shipping companies acquiring these startups that do offer clean tech solutions to incorporate them onto the ship, with whatever difficulty comes with, because changing a ship is not easy, right? So we're figuring it out, maybe baby steps at a time, but we're going to get there because there's the willingness. And every conversation about profit is always related to some sort of connection to how do we have a triple bottom line. And I think that's very encouraging.
All right. Thomas, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.